The next week was full of discovery, and although the dome was to be kept secret, rumors were making their way throughout Wheel. Word was that they had reached their destination. Because of that, the elders had to sneak around so they would not attract large crowds with their endless questions. Basil spent that whole week, day and night, poring over the books and manuals in the ancient library. He knew it wouldn't be long before he and the other elders would have to provide answers to an impatient public. On the 8th day, while eating a well-deserved lunch, Professor Hubert approached him. "Hello, Basil. We found a compartment you might want to look at." "Hello, Hubert. Why?" "I can't explain it without you seeing it, but it's important that you come with me." Basil reluctantly put his sandwich down and followed Hubert to the most important compartment. Once there, Hubert explained that the compartment contained a number of electronic devices that looked like twin beds. Each was covered with a canopy from the middle section to the head. Hubert handed Basil an instruction manual. The manual was worn, dirty, and looked as if time had erased most of it. Basil read what he could. 10 minutes later, he said, "Well, this is interesting, and important, just like you said. Hubert, could you please go find Casey and Corina?" "Yes, sir." When they entered the room, they found Basil leaning over one of the beds. He appeared to be studying several electronic panels attached to the wall above it. As he was studying the panels, he stood back and pushed a red button just above the bed, and it slid into the wall. He pushed it again, and it slid back out. He did so 3 times before he noticed Casey, Corina, and Herbert standing at the door, watching him. Basil said, "Casey, Corina, this contraption here, which looks like a bed, is a knowledge insertion device. If I read this manual correctly, a person would lie in it while hooked up to these panels for a predetermined amount of time." He directed their attention as he put his hand on several cables hanging from the wall just below the panels. "These cables attach to the body of the person in the bed, and then, I guess you go to sleep. The machine is designed to fill the person's mind with all the knowledge from the beginning of the Earth until this present time. The manual isn't clear whether current time means today, or 3,000 years ago, when we left the Earth. Unfortunately, the manual is in such bad shape. It's hard to read, and whole paragraphs are missing." He pointed to the end of the row of beds, and then he pointed up to 3 more decks and said, "There are 48 of these devices in total. I plan to see if they work, so I'm considering using one. Would you like to join me?" Casey asked, "Could you go over that again? What will happen if we do?" "While sleeping in the machine, it will increase your brain capacity from 10 to 15% to 60 or 70%, which means it will fill our heads with massive amounts of information. The manual says we can select what information to insert into a person's head while in the bed. I'm assuming that information should include how to get off of this ship. Too many people are asking questions, and if we don't come up with some answers before long, we'll have to deal with riots on board. After spending the last week in the ancient library, I'm still uncertain about so many things. I'm afraid to go forward, much less reveal anything to the citizens." They all agreed to use the devices. Alan Brisk, one of the other elders, who entered the room as Basil was explaining the beds, said, "Basil, before you get into those machines, call for at least 3 medical staff to stand by and monitor you, for your own safety should anything go wrong." Hubert agreed with Alan, so Basil sent Alan to bring back 3 physicians. While Alan looked for the doctors, Basil, Casey, and Corina continued inspecting the beds and studying the manual a second time. 2 hours later, Handel came into the room. "Mr. Brisk sent me to tell you the physicians are here. They're still at the entrance, puking. I'm certain they're having mental breakdowns. Mr. Brisk told me to tell you they should be well enough to come within the next hour." Corina spent the next half an hour explaining to Handel why they needed the physicians, what the beds were for, and whether they planned to use them. "It depends on whether they're still usable. Handel, I don't know how dangerous this is, but I plan to go through with it. We need to get off this ship. If we fail, everyone could die. So, I don't feel I have a choice." "That sounds rather extreme. We have been living on Wheel for 3,000 years. We can live here another 3,000 years and 10 times that. I don't see what the emergency is. Don't you dare die. Mom and Dad would disown me. We won't die. The doctors will check the beds out before we use them. If it's not safe, we won't do it, alright? Okay. The doctors came into the room, and they were dizzy and in poor shape. Basil asked, "Gentlemen, do you need more time to pull yourselves together?" A tall, heavy-set, balding doctor, with scarce patches of red hair, wearing thick glasses, answered, "No, we're okay to continue." "What do you need from us, and why didn't someone tell us about all of this?" Basil explained how the dome was a recent discovery by Casey, Corina, and Handel. He told them why they had spoken to no one on board yet. If this gets out before we have answers, I'm certain there would be riots on board. So, you must keep this quiet until we can figure out how to make our way to the planet. One doctor nearly passed out, and had to sit for couple minutes. Planet? You're saying we've reached our destination? Yes. We've arrived at our destination. Basil was sure the doctor would actually pass out if he told them how long ago they had arrived. Once the doctor looked as if he could handle more information, he explained what he had learned about the beds. He said, "Now, we need you to inspect these contraptions and make sure they're safe to use." He handed the tall, heavy-set doctor the manual, and told him and his colleagues to study it and the beds to find out if they could use them. After an hour of studying and arguing about the manual, the doctors put the manual on a table and inspected the beds. One of the other doctors, the short skinny one with a small pointy nose and thick black hair, not the one who nearly passed out, said, "These beds, and the attached technical devices are in perfect working order. On the last page of the manual, which I assume you neglected to read, says they designed the beds to last upwards of 10,000 years. They expected many of the crafts sent out to travel no less than several thousand years. So, they're still new by those standards." Basil said, "Well, thank you, Doctor, for the information and the rude comment. Can you monitor us? We intend to use them immediately." "Yes. Most of the technical parts work similarly to many of the devices we're using now in our medical centers. We can have you on your way in about 45 minutes if we do it right." He walked over to the first bed and said, "M1, please activate." When he said that, a small lens on the wall sent out a light that went down and then up as if looking for something to scan. The doctor walked over to the wall and repeated it, putting his face up to the light. Nothing happened. He looked at the manual again and then asked Basil to repeat what he had just said, and to put his face up to the lens. Basil put his face in front of the lens and said, "M1, please activate." Different screens and monitors lit up once Basil said that. Basil turned to the doctor and asked, "Why didn't it work for you?" At that moment, the dome, wheel, answered with a woman's voice, "The individual is not an ancient and does not have the necessary blue eyes, nor has the individual been given authority to activate the memory device. They can be activated only by an ancient bearing blue eyes." Basil asked, "You can speak?" "Yes, Basil Pascal. You activated me once I scanned your eyes with the security device. I now recognize your voice and will answer when you speak." That was such a fresh development. Basil had so many questions he wanted to ask, but the doctors were patiently standing around, waiting to monitor them once they were in the memory devices. Since the ship can actually speak, Basil thought maybe he could get all the answers they needed from the ship itself, rather than the beds. "Ship, are you able to answer any and all questions I submit to you? For example, we need to make our way to the planet, but we don't have all the necessary information to do so. Can you explain how we do that? I can answer any questions you require, but you may not understand the answers. I can tell that no one has accessed this side of the Ark for 2906 years, and I conclude you're not capable of making your way to the planet without serious consequences. Ship, what can you tell me about these memory devices? Will they be beneficial in helping us gain that knowledge?" "Yes. They are in perfect working order, and should supply you with the necessary knowledge to accomplish an exodus safely." "Okay, Ship. I plan to use one of the devices, but when one doctor, who is here to monitor us, tried to activate the bed, nothing happened. How do I fix that? Can you give them access to the devices? Yes, just say so. You only need to ask me to give authority, and I will comply. Also, you can address me as Wheel, or Wheel 17. Can I do the same for everyone I desire to give authority? Yes, Basil. I recognized you as the senior elder, and you can give authority to anything related to this craft or any device on board, and when you do, mention the name of the person you are giving authority and have them speak a sentence so I can recognize their voice. Can they say anything? Yes, but I need to hear at least 6 words to recognize their voice pattern. Afterward, their voice pattern will remain in my database. Wheel, I would like you to give Dr. Gary Newton, Dr. William Howell, and Dr. Ted Harris permanent access to everything in this room, including all related machinery and electronics, for every memory device in this compartment. I will have them state their names and where they live in order for you to recognize them. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. I'm waiting. The 3 doctors, one after another, gave their full names and addresses. Wheel accepted them and gave them access, according to Basil's demand. Gary, the tall fat doctor, walked over to the first device, and said, "It looks like the device is active." When he said that, a hologram of a man, well-dressed, 6'2", bald, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, and in his 50s projected out from the wall. He stood in place staring at the group for a minute, and afterward said, "Well, hello Basil Pascal, Dr. Gary Newton, Dr. William Howell, Dr. Ted Harris, and Associates. How do you do?" Everyone answered, "Fine." Basil said, "These others are ancients by the names of Student Casey Hill, Student Corina Freeman, Elder Hubert Longfellow, and Elder Alan Brisk. Hello all. My name is Dr. Arnold Clark. Call me Arnie. I'm the scientist who designed these memory devices, and I specifically designed and built them for the ancients to use while traveling from Earth to their new home." Arnie projected a troublesome look on his face. He looked as if he didn't know what to do next or was malfunctioning. He paused, looked at the group as if he composed himself, and said, "I noticed they're unused. I'm learning something that happened to the first group of elders. They needed to activate the devices in year 60 of the voyage." Basil said, "They died in a compartment fire 58 years into the voyage." "I see. I'm pulling up that information now. How sad. I see it destroyed the whole Elder Library. You were lucky to survive this long. You've been stuck in orbit for 2906 years. I will set that information aside for another time. Let's get to it. I will now give you an overview of the devices and how they work." When he said that, he closed his eyes. Afterward, every device in the building came on and slid in and out of the wall for the next minute. The group stood and watched, not knowing what was happening. 15 seconds later, Arnie said, "All the devices are in perfect working order. Please give me a moment. I'm at 90% capacity. The devices will be functional in 15 minutes. I'm uploading 3,000 years of information." He closed his eyes again. Basil figured they would be there for a while and suggested that everyone find chairs so they could sit down. Once everyone was sitting, Arnie opened his eyes and said, "There we go. I'm finished uploading the last 30 centuries. Let's get started. I developed these devices to help the ancients in their studies. Those studies included every detail of Earth's history, the ship's operation, the population, and everything associated with beginning a new life once Wheel 17 reached its destination. If I'm correct, this crew has lived with only a fraction of that knowledge because of the death of the first elders, and the destruction of the Elder Library. That library contained all the information needed to complete the mission. I'm sorry for that, but not to worry, we can catch up. Again, I apologize, and I don't mean to be insensitive knowing that you have been stuck in orbit for the last 2900 years." Arnie fell silent for several minutes while soft music played throughout the compartment. When he finally responded, he said, "The death of those elders, and your situation made me sad. Music always makes me feel better. Doesn't it make you feel better?" Basil answered, "No, not really." "Oh, okay. let's get started. I will not go into all the technical stuff, but I will tell you how the devices work and how to use them. We can discuss the technical stuff at a later time. As he spoke, a hologram chair, an end table, and a cup of something hot appeared. He sat and took a drink. I designed the devices to be used by the ancients to help you gain and retain knowledge. He stood up, and a hologram of a device was displayed in front of him, and then he walked around it and pointed out all the connections and how to attach them to the subject. Afterward, he explained how the monitors operated and what to look for. If this light is green, the subject is doing well. If it turns red, you need to wake the subject up. They are either resisting the implant of information, or they're having a nightmare. I don't recall anyone having a nightmare yet, but could you imagine how such a long nightmare could mess up your life? One night, I decided I wanted to learn to fly. I ended up riding a roller coaster for 6 months. Well, it was 30 seconds in the device, but 6 months in my mind. Good thing I like roller coasters. He looked around the room, as if expecting everyone to laugh. Next, he looked down at the table and said, "I sure miss coffee." He sat next to the cup and took a hologram drink. Finally, the device will guide the person using it based on any series of questions. At first, the individual only needs to state what general or particular area of study they wish to learn. If they choose nothing specific, the device will mine the individual's brain. I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason the devices were placed on board the ARCs before they were sent out is because the WSA, that's the World Space Agency for those of you who don't know that, suspected that over the long periods of time some of the vessels had to endure, actual history and knowledge would suffer extensively, and Wheel contains all the knowledge from the beginning of the Earth until now. So, in order to keep that from happening, I was tasked with building a device that could be used to insert or reinsert such knowledge into the mind of the ancients while they slept. The main purpose was so they could perform their roles on board and after reaching their destination. One person could never retain or research such massive amounts of knowledge through the normal processes. He stood up and walked towards the group. He stared specifically at Corina. Such a lovely young woman. My wife was a beautiful woman. Are you married? Corina blushed and then answered, No. No, I'm not. Everyone in the room looked at Casey, except for the doctors, who didn't know that he and Corina were in a relationship. Too bad I'm dead. I assume I'm dead. I don't know anyone who has lived for 3,000 years, do you? No one answered, and he continued, I was a sleep study scientist at the time we discovered the cooling of the Earth's core. At that time, I already had the devices blueprinted, and I was 100% confident they would work. I was successful with less ore machines, so it was only a matter of funding that prevented me from building one, but I digress. When the WSA found out about the memory devices, they contracted, actually forced me, to build 48 machines for each spacecraft. I complied, of course. If there wasn't a disaster in the near future, they would have paid me an exuberant amount of money too. I had bills, a family, and a mortgage. He stopped and looked at Basil. I am sorry. It was fortunate they gave my family a place on board Arnie 67, although I'm sure I died long before that ARC left the Earth. Yes, they named one of the ARCs after me. It was a small price to help in your survival. Believe it or not, these machines might make a difference whether you survive or not. We'll see, I guess. Basil said, Arnie, could you please get on with it? We plan to use the devices within the next couple of hours if you don't mind. After giving Basil a dirty look, he said, all right. The devices operate during REM sleep. During that period, it uploads information to the mind as dreams. A normal person can live a lifetime in a matter of a few minutes in the dream state. The device only needs to make a suggestion once the subject reaches REM. The subject's mind will take over from there, and then once the dream is established, pertinent information is incorporated into the dream. You might dream you're in a class or performing a task you have never performed before, thereby learning through your dreams about the thing or the process. Often, normal studies can take years to master. I designed the devices to reduce the time it would typically take to master any subject. The human, any child or adult, is attached to the device during their regular hours of sleep, mostly at night. That's when all the magic, I explained, takes place. Alan asked, "Are you sure they're safe? Could it bring about mental issues? Do you understand what I mean?" "Yes, I know what you mean. The devices are safe to sleep in for the 8 hours most humans sleep, or more if needed. Often, there's no subject matter uploaded. That's when the device can mine the person's subconscious for material. Also, that's where the subject could most likely end up in an extended nightmare, but there's a failsafe. If the light turns red, you simply pull them out of the dream. Again, if you don't set the device to anything specific, the participant's own mind would determine what information is transferred. The whole of the ship's database is available." Basil asked, "Can a person use the device whenever they choose? Does it have to be during normal sleeping hours?" "They can use the device anytime, but the device will keep that person in REM state until they have downloaded the desired information. So, the length of REM will depend on the complexity and amount of information needed to complete the session." Hubert asked, "Can someone other than an ancient use a device?" "Yes. The ship's database includes all the different professions, from a primary school teacher to a theoretical physicist. There are no restrictions, although they were expected to be used by the ancients only. If Basil Pascal, or anyone with the proper authority, gives permission, anyone can use them." He walked to the side of the device and lifted 2 intravenous lines and said, "Another point of interest, each device includes an intravenous system. They're a bit crude, but they will keep the subject fed and hydrated, should someone be in the device for an extended period. Some information can take up to 3 days to download, depending on the person's aptitude for that subject. Finally, the devices can increase one's mental capacity up to 70% above normal capacity, but at first, it will take the mind at least 3 weeks to process all the information. It takes that long for your brain to acclimate to the method." Just before Arnie finished, Jesse Monroe and Ryan Kennedy walked into the room. Basil intended to put those who sat for the whole lecture into the devices to test them out, but Jess and Ryan insisted that they be included. Will, the handsome doctor, the one who nearly passed out, asked Arnie to activate 7 of the devices. Each person gave specific instructions and answered the ensuing questions regarding the implanted information they would like to receive. Basil asked for information about how to make their way to the planet. Casey asked for knowledge of different machinery throughout the ship. The books on nature fascinated Corina, and she asked for a better understanding. Jess loved military books and asked for understanding military offensive and defensive actions throughout history. Ryan didn't ask. He wanted to leave it up to his natural abilities, as did Alan. Hubert, like Basil, knew that things would change once they took up habitation on the planet and wanted to understand better the governmental structure to be implemented once they were established. Basil made one last request. "Wheel, I would like to give each ancient in this room knowledge of how to communicate and operate Wheel. I would like every ancient to have equal access to Wheel, equivalent to my own." Wheel answered, "Again, you need to tell me to do so, and then once I have cataloged their voices, they will have full access, equal to yours." Before they got into the devices, he went through the procedure with the other ancients in the room. He changed his first request for everyone in a device to include knowledge of how to access all of Wheel. Based on the requests, Arnie determined each person would be in the devices from 3 to 4 hours, for a cursory understanding. They would need to return to the devices for the next 7 days to gain full knowledge of their requests. Basil already understood government, so he chose to learn how to bring the craft and its people down to the surface. Wheel mentioned it would only take 3 hours in the device. The rest of the group would be in the devices for at least 4 hours. He asked, "Wheel, why only 3 hours for me?" "You will find that it's not too difficult to land or exit the Wheel. Basically, it all depends on particular commands." He was disappointed. Handel came in and out of the room, checking on Corina. Often, he stood around, annoying the doctors. They asked him to leave several times. He was so worried. 3 hours later, Basil emerged from his induced coma and could not speak for over an hour. He laid there as the doctors tried talking to him. He didn't answer at first, and it worried them. After a while, the doctors, along with Arnie, began talking among themselves about how they would avoid responsibility and how they would cover it up. In the middle of that conversation, Basil said, "Cover what up?" The tall, fat doctor asked, "How do you feel, Mr. Pascal, sir?" As Arnie bent over to have a closer look into his eyes, he said, "I'm fine. I know a lot of things I didn't before, and I'm still processing the information, although I seemed to be functional." The last doctor, the handsome, quite well-dressed one, said, "That's a good sign." Arnie said, "That's what we would have expected. The others should emerge at any time now. Sir, you look tired. You should take it easy for a couple of minutes, don't get out of the device yet." 1/2 hour later, the others woke. One by one, they came to life. Casey was the last one to wake up. "I know what a bike is." Corina asked. "What? What are you talking about?" "Never mind. I'm just dizzy. It seems like I was gone for an entire year, and then a moment at the same time. I don't recall eating anything the whole time. How are you, Corina?" "I'm fine, but I too sensed I was gone for a long time, and at the same time, it felt like it was only a moment too." Everyone had that sensation, although Corina had no adverse effects, while the others were in various stages of confusion. Casey and Alan were dizzy, Hubert was tired, and Ryan was speaking a different language. Everyone thought it was gibberish until Jess spoke back. Ryan said, "I've been learning to speak the language for at least 2 years. In fact, Jess was there with me, right?" Jess answered, "I remember seeing you in my dream several times. Each time was a different battle. We met and spoke a different language. I believe it was called French. What is French? Were we in the French Foreign Legion?" Ryan said, "Something like that. I don't know." Arnie reminded them it might take 3 weeks, or longer, for each one to have total recall and acclimate to the process. That disturbed Basil. He wasn't sure if he had that long to provide answers to the rest of the citizens. He and the rest of the group sat recouping for an hour before they could stand and walk around without becoming dizzy. Arnie thought they were overreacting. The tall, fat doctor suggested they go for a walk once they were stable. As they were walking, Casey met his father. "Son, I need your help. Can you come with me, please?" "Sure, Dad." He said goodbye and followed his father, who led him to one of the large tubes. Truthfully, his dad just wanted to talk to him about how grateful and excited he was that Casey and his friends found the dome and that Casey made sure he involved him. He was proud of his son. Once inside the tube, his dad pointed out a giant robot standing in front of 5 others. Casey looked at the robot and a brace that was holding him in place. His father asked if he would help him release the brace and hold it back so he could cut the robot free. While standing next to the robot, Casey said, "Father, this is a construction robot. He should have jettisoned to the planet when we first arrived." "Yes, I read the manual, son. He's stuck on the lower bracket. It looks like a piece of space debris flew through the outer shield and hit the lower bracket, bending it so it could not drop and release this robot, which also blocked the other 5 from being released too." Casey spoke to the robot. "CR, what's your designation?" "My designation is CR-55. I cannot move forward. I need to exit the ship to complete my task." "CR-55, we need to cut the bracket holding you in place so you can complete your task. Please do not leave until this engineer gives you instructions to do so." "Yes, sir." The bot pulled its leg back, taking the pressure off the bracket so Casey's dad could cut him free. "Okay, Dad. You can cut the bracket away so it can lower and release the bot." "How did you know to do that?" "I tried everything I could to get it to release the pressure on the bracket." Casey answered, "I have blue eyes, Dad." "Father, do you know what a bike is?" "What?" "Never mind. I'll explain it to you tonight at dinner. If it's okay, can Corina and I come over for dinner?" "All right, but you better not forget to tell me, and don't make excuses." "All right. When you're finished cutting the bracket away, just tell the bot CR55 proceed to your mission, and it and those behind him will leave the ark once you're out of the tube. Casey returned to the group, who was in the middle of lunch. Corrina offered him an egg salad sandwich and water. Afterward, he said, when we settle on the planet, I hope we find better food than what we have here on the wheel. I read in the books that we don't even eat 1/10 of what people ate back on the Earth. Corrina agreed with him and asked if he was going to eat his sandwich. Once Casey's father finished cutting the bracket away, he stood back and said, CR55, proceed to your mission. The robot responded, Sir, you must exit the tube first. Oh, yes, I forgot. He closed the hatch behind him, and there was a loud roar. It looked like the robot exploded, but the fire was caused by the bot's rocket system igniting, and the bot flew out the tube. Once it was outside, the others followed. One looked at Casey's dad when he left. He was sure the machine waved and smiled at him. The 7 ancients spent the next 7 nights sleeping in the devices. They were actually very comfortable and produced an excellent night's sleep, although the dreams were so real. On Monday, Basil asked all the ancients and all the professionals to meet at the library, conference room, Zeta. He stood and motioned for everyone to be quiet. Citizens, let me explain what we need to do next, but before I say anything else, let me remind you we need to continue keeping this from the rest of the wheel's population. Nothing has changed, and it's still too early to tell them without causing unnecessary confusion. Now, let me explain how we get off of this ship. I know there are hundreds of transport vehicles in the dome, but right now, those will be for transporting research groups, surveyors, and technical personnel to monitor the progress of the landing pads. The CR robots should have already prepared the pads for the landing craft. I want to know where we stand regarding the pads before I say anything publicly. Basil explained what the robots were, and their purpose in preparing landing pads. He said, most of the bots, except for the 6 who got stuck in the tube, left for the surface 2,900 years ago. Hopefully, they have completed their task despite leaving those 6 behind. Next, he told them about how they would get to the planet. It was more of a rehearsal for when he explained it to the rest of the people on board. He began, the wheel is 6 different ships. You know we have 4 layers of compartments below the first layer or the upper land mass. So, each layer is a ship by itself. Everyone began talking among themselves. Basil let the conversation continue for 5 minutes before he shouted. Citizens, listen. The crowd quieted and turned their attention back to Basil. Again, the ship has 6 layers. The first is the farming, or land layer. The second is the living compartments. The third is the warehouse and supply layer, the fourth is the industrial layer, and the fifth is the river, which I don't actually call a layer, although it is, and now we count the dome on the other side as 6. You know the ship has a circumference of 60 miles. I'm sure you have all seen, on every level, the metal section of hallway expanding 30 feet on each level. Now, this is how we get to the surface. The ship is like a wheel, and is round, and each layer is like a belt. When you release a belt buckle, you can lay the belt flat. That's what happens to the wheel. Those metal portions of the hallways are like the buckle. When released, the section becomes straight and will transport to the planet where, hopefully, the construction robots have prepared landing pads based on each layer's configuration. One professor, with a scraggly beard and a necktie, asked, what's keeping those layers from losing air once they're released? Won't that kill everyone on board? Donovan, remember when you were a child, we had drills that sent everyone to their compartments? When the red lights flashed, everyone was given 10 minutes to find a secure compartment. We haven't done one for almost 35 years, but those drills were in case we had a rupture in any one of the layers. When we had those drills, the ancients pushed several levers in the library that encased each layer with a force field, and according to my sources, those same levers are in the command center of the dome. We didn't know then, but now we understand the drills. All of us should know what a force field is. The builders encased our sun in a force field, and another force field encases the whole ship, both sides. Also, There are separate force fields surrounding each of the layers, and each was designed to withstand entry to the surface of the planet. Along both sides of each layer was a hall of machines. Do any of you engineers know about those halls? Casey's father said, yes, we all know about them. We haven't done anything with them other than inspect and clean them. Otherwise, we have ignored them. Thanks, Jonathan. You're right. Therefore, when we arrived at our destination, as they contain the engines and stabilizers to get us to the planet and slow our descent once we've entered the atmosphere. On the other side of that hall is another compartment that surrounds each layer and contains a solid propellant fuel. The propellant is the to ignite and provide the fuel to the thrusters, and the flight engines. Those flight engines will take us to and set us atop the pads that the CRs have been, hopefully, preparing for the last 2,900 years. The CRs should have prepared pads 65 miles long and 4 miles wide, one pad for one ship or layer. The pads were constructed so we can land on a flat surface. Also, the robots are equipped with homing beacons to direct each layer to its own pad. Again, I hope they have finished them. There were 6 of them trapped on board until Jonathan released them. We will send one of the survey ships to observe their progress. The robots should have completed those pads a long time ago. Let's hope they maintained them all these years. Initially, it would have only taken them a year to prepare the pad. That year is when we would have been preparing ourselves to land and exit Wheel. Another engineer, a young woman who was following in her father's footsteps, asked, "Will you be taking any professionals when you go?" "I would like to go, if possible." "Yes, we will send Casey Hill, and he will select a crew to travel to the planet with him. I'm sure we will need several professionals to go along." Now, let's get back to our discussion regarding the exit from the Wheel. We will signal when it's time for us to prepare for the exit by sounding the alarm. Every citizen will be instructed to go to their home compartments. I suspect we can give a 3-hour leeway to give everyone time to get home, and I will come over the general communications system directing everyone to their compartments and ask them to be patient until we sound the all-clear bell after we've landed on the planet. I'll tell them they should expect to be confined to their compartments for up to 3 days. After everyone is secure, we'll release the 5th layer into orbit where it will remain intact just in case we need it again. Next, we will establish the force fields around the next 4 layers. As soon as those are established, the force field protecting the top layer will be shut down and the sun will be set into orbit just like the river. It will take 2 days to accomplish that, but once the sun is placed in orbit, we can start sending the 3 bottom layers down to the planet. We'll detach each layer and make sure it is on its way before we release the next and so forth. The young woman asked, "When will we be landing the Wheel?" "When we know we have done all we can do to prepare. There is still a lot of work to do. Tomorrow morning, we'll send the survey crew and find out if the pads are ready. It takes the robots 1 year to prep the pads. If the pads aren't ready, we must wait another year." Again, Casey Hill will take others from the various professions with him. Talk to Casey if you want to go. What's your name? Serena, sir. Okay, Serena, sir, talk to Casey. Serena Manchester, sir. Basil smiled. Yes, of course, it is. Talk to Casey.